I am Thomas, 74 years old, and somehow still reeling from the betrayal my own family inflicted on me. As a retired postal inspector, I thought I'd earned a peaceful retirement in my house overlooking Rehoboth Bay. Last Tuesday morning, my son Stephen showed up with his family and 6 suitcases claiming they needed to stay for renovations. Between his forced smiles and his wife Patricia's dismissive attitude, Stephen announced they'd be moving in for weeks, maybe months. "Don't worry, Dad, we won't be any trouble," he said, already directing Patricia toward my master bedroom. I simply nodded and tried to hide my unease. That evening, I overheard them planning to convert my home office into a permanent bedroom for Patricia's parents. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had family members who took your kindness for weakness. Living in Henlopen Acres meant tranquility to most people, but inside my 2-story colonial home, tension began filling every corner the moment they arrived. My house, with its bay windows and wraparound porch overlooking the water, had been my sanctuary with Martha for 40 years. My bedroom, where Martha's pictures still sat on the dresser and her favorite yellow paint still brightened the walls, became their master suite within hours of their arrival. From retirement until that morning, I had maintained my independence, managed my finances, and kept the house exactly as Martha and I had arranged it. I cooked my own meals, maintained the garden she had planted, and followed the routines we had established together. Patricia immediately began rearranging everything. She threw out my groceries, calling them expired and unhealthy. She moved my record collection to the garage, claiming it was dusty and outdated. She redecorated the living room with modern art and relocated all my photographs to make space for her belongings. "Obadiah," she said, using my formal name like I was a child, "you'll be much more comfortable on the first floor. No more dangerous stairs to worry about." But this was my home. These were my stairs. This was the bedroom where Martha and I had shared our dreams and faced our fears together. Every corner held memories they couldn't understand and apparently didn't respect. I felt like a stranger in my own house, watching my life being systematically erased to make room for theirs. Within 24 hours of their arrival, my house no longer felt like mine. Patricia moved through my rooms like a general inspecting conquered territory, making lists on her phone and rearranging furniture without asking permission. She started with the kitchen, dumping the contents of my refrigerator into garbage bags. "Thomas, this cheese expired 3 days ago," she announced, waving a package of cheddar I'd bought just 2 days earlier. "And this deli meat has so many preservatives you could die from sodium poisoning." I watched silently as she discarded groceries I'd carefully selected, food that had sustained me perfectly well for 5 years since Martha's death. "I've lived to be 74 eating what I like," I wanted to say, but held my tongue. Stephen was already walking through the house, talking on his phone about room arrangements and talking to contractors about timeline estimates. "Dad," he said, returning to the kitchen where Patricia continued her food purge, "Patricia and I will take the master bedroom. You'll be more comfortable on the first floor anyway. No stairs to worry about, and the guest room bathroom is right there." My heart clenched. The master bedroom had been Martha's and my sanctuary for 40 years. Her photographs still stood on the dresser, her books remained on the nightstand, her favorite lavender sachets still scented the closet. It was where we'd planned our retirement, where she'd fought her final battle with cancer, where I'd held her hand as she slipped away. "I'm quite comfortable in my bedroom," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I climb those stairs every day. It's good exercise for someone my age." Patricia intervened with that patronizing tone I was already learning to hate. "Thomas, you're 74 years old. It's dangerous to navigate stairs at your age, especially at night when you need the bathroom. What if you fall and break a hip?" "I have an upstairs bathroom," I objected, "and I've never fallen downstairs in my entire life." "There's a first time for everything," Patricia replied coolly. "Stephen, tell your father we're concerned about his safety." Stephen gave me that look I'd been seeing more frequently in recent years, a mixture of pity and impatience that made me feel like a burden rather than the man who'd raised him, worked 40 years to provide for his education, and sacrificed to give him every opportunity in life. Dad, please. It's only for a few weeks while we sort things out. Besides, the guest room is quite comfortable. You'll have everything you need right there on the main floor. Comfortable wasn't the word I'd use for the cramped space with its narrow single bed and outdated furniture. But I realized arguing was pointless. They'd already made their decision, and my opinion clearly didn't matter in my own house. I nodded reluctantly and began the heartbreaking process of moving my belongings downstairs. Every item I packed felt like a small surrender. Martha's jewelry box, the framed photos from our honeymoon, the books we'd read together on quiet evenings, the small keepsakes that made our bedroom a reflection of our shared life. By evening, the master bedroom looked entirely different. Patricia had hung modern artwork, arranged her cosmetics on Martha's vanity, and moved my photographs to make room for her designer purses and jewelry collection. The living room now housed Stephen's laptop bag and business papers scattered across the coffee table where Martha and I used to share morning coffee. Brandon and Ashley had claimed the upstairs office, transforming my quiet study into a teenager's entertainment center, complete with gaming systems and speakers that thumped bass through the floorboards. The sounds of their music and video games replaced the peaceful silence I'd treasured since Martha's passing. At dinner that first night, sitting at my own table, I felt like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. But the real shock was still coming. 2 weeks into their stay, I discovered the truth about their real intentions. It came from Ashley, my 19-year-old granddaughter, who knocked quietly on my cramped bedroom door one rainy Sunday afternoon. I had been sitting on the narrow bed reading one of Martha's favorite novels and listening to music through headphones Brandon had helped me set up on my phone. "Grandpa, may I come in?" she asked tentatively. Her voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Of course, sweetheart." I was surprised and pleased. Ashley had barely spoken to me since they'd arrived, usually rushing past with her phone pressed to her ear or disappearing upstairs to her room. She entered and stopped in the doorway, looking around at what my life had become. Boxes of my belongings stacked against the walls, photo albums piled on the small dresser, books everywhere because there wasn't enough shelf space. It was the first time she'd seen how thoroughly I'd been displaced from my own home. "Wow," she said softly. "I didn't realize you had to bring everything down here." "Not everything," I replied. "Your mother decided most of my things were outdated or took up too much space." Ashley sat on the edge of the bed, fidgeting with the hem of her college sweatshirt. "Grandpa, I came to warn you about something. I overheard Mom and Dad talking last night when they thought I was asleep." Something in her voice made me close the book and give her my full attention. "What about Mom's parents are moving here? Grandma Linda and Grandpa Richard. They're selling their house in Ocean City." She paused, meeting my eyes. "They already have a buyer lined up." Even though I'd suspected something like this was coming, hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow. The house was large, but not large enough for 7 adults. "Where do they plan to put them?" Ashley's face crumpled with genuine distress. "That's why I came to warn you. Mom and Dad think you'd be better off somewhere else. They've been looking at places, assisted living facilities." My blood went cold. "What kind of facilities?" "There's a place called Sunset Manor in Lewis. They went to tour it yesterday while you were at your doctor's appointment. They said you'd be better taken care of there with professionals who understand elderly care." I knew Sunset Manor by reputation. It was the cheapest nursing home in the area, constantly understaffed and known for its institutional atmosphere. The local newspaper had run several investigative articles about neglect and poor conditions there. "When are they planning to tell me about this decision they've made for me?" Ashley looked down at her hands. "Tonight, when everyone's home. They want to have a family meeting after dinner." Family meeting. As if I were still part of the family, rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Did they mention how long they expect me to stay at this place? She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mom said it would be permanent. She thinks you can't live alone anymore, and they're too busy with work and college expenses to take care of you properly. Take care of me. I had been taking care of myself perfectly well for 5 years since Martha died. I managed my finances, maintained the house, cooked my own meals, drove my own car, and kept all my medical appointments. The only thing I couldn't do was prevent my own family from treating me like an invalid. Grandpa, I tried to talk to them. Ashley continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. I told them you seem fine to me, that maybe they could hire someone to check on you instead. But Mom said the decision was already made. They put down a deposit. A deposit. They had already committed my future without consulting me, just like they'd committed to taking over my bedroom, my kitchen, my entire life. I felt anger rising in me, but also a strange clarity. Ashley, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You couldn't have changed their minds even if you'd tried harder. But it's not fair, she said, wiping her eyes. This is your house. You built a life here with Grandma Martha. They shouldn't be able to just ship you off because it's inconvenient to have you around. Out of the mouths of babes, my 19-year-old granddaughter understood something that apparently escaped her parents completely. This wasn't about my welfare or safety. This was about their convenience and their plans for my property. What are you going to do? Ashley asked. I looked at her young face full of genuine concern and love and made a decision that would change everything. I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I'm not going down without a fight. That evening's family meeting unfolded exactly as Ashley had warned me it would. Stephen gathered everyone in the living room after dinner, arranging chairs in a semicircle like a tribunal. I sat in my old recliner, the only piece of furniture Patricia hadn't been able to relocate, and watched the faces of my relatives prepare to deliver my sentence. Dad, Stephen began, his tone artificially cheerful. We want to talk about your future, about what's best for everyone. My future. I looked him directly in the eye. Or the future of this house. Patricia jumped in before Stephen could answer. Thomas, we can all see that living alone is becoming difficult for you. You forget to take medications, you don't eat properly, and this house is too big for one person to maintain safely. Really? I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. And here I thought you were concerned about where to put your parents. Stephen's face flushed. He glanced quickly at Ashley, who was studying her hands in her lap. Dad, let's be honest. Yes, Patricia's parents need a place to live after selling their house, but that's separate from our concerns about your health and safety. So you've found me a solution that solves both problems. We found you a wonderful community, Patricia said, pulling out a glossy brochure. Sunset Manor isn't just a nursing home. It's a retirement community for active seniors. There's a library, organized activities, professional staff to help with medications and meals. I knew she was lying. Sunset Manor was notorious for its minimal services and institutional atmosphere, but I also knew that arguing about the quality of their chosen prison wouldn't change their minds. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. This is my home and I'm staying here. Dad, be reasonable. Stephen leaned forward. You can't live here alone, and we can't take care of you while managing our own responsibilities. We have careers. We have Brandon starting his senior year, Ashley's college tuition to consider. I didn't ask you to take care of me, I reminded him. You moved in here and decided to run my life. Now you want to ship me off to make room for Patricia's parents. Thomas, how can you say that? Patricia's voice rose with indignation. We're only thinking of your welfare. You could fall down those stairs, have a medical emergency with no one around to help, forget to turn off the stove and burn the house down. Then leave, I replied simply. Go back to your lives and let me live mine. That's impossible, Stephen said. We've already made arrangements. You're moving to Sunset Manor next Friday. Everything's been decided. And if I refuse, Stephen exchanged a look with Patricia that I didn't like. Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. At your age, if family members express concerns about your ability to live independently, the state takes those concerns seriously. The threat was clear. They were prepared to have me declared incompetent if I didn't comply voluntarily. I looked around the room at my family, searching for any sign of love or genuine concern, but all I saw was determination to remove an obstacle from their path. Fine, I said quietly. I'll go to your nursing home, but don't expect me to forgive you for this. The relief on their faces told me everything I needed to know about their true motivations. The next 5 days passed in a blur of packing and silent resentment. Patricia supervised the selection of my belongings, like a customs officer, deciding what would fit in the small room at Sunset Manor and what was unnecessary clutter. Most of my books, my collection of Postal Service memorabilia, and boxes of photographs were relegated to the garage for safekeeping. On Friday morning, I found myself sitting in the passenger seat of Stephen's SUV, watching my house disappear in the rearview mirror. The drive to Sunset Manor took 30 minutes, long enough for me to absorb the finality of what was happening. I was leaving the home Martha and I had shared, the place where we'd planned to grow old together, to spend my remaining years in institutional care. Sunset Manor looked exactly as depressing as I'd expected. A 3-story brick building surrounded by manicured but lifeless landscaping, with elderly residents visible through windows, sitting motionless in wheelchairs, or staring at television screens in the common areas. The smell hit me as soon as we walked through the front door, disinfectant, mixed with cafeteria food, and the unmistakable odor of people waiting to die. The intake process took 2 hours. Forms to sign, medical information to transfer, room assignments, and meal schedules to review. My new home was a 10 by 12-foot space with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. Stephen and Patricia helped me unpack my 2 suitcases, a process that took all of 15 minutes given how little I'd been allowed to bring. "We'll visit soon, Dad," Stephen promised as they prepared to leave, "once we get settled with Patricia's parents and finish the renovations." But his eyes avoided mine, and I knew these visits would be infrequent at best. After they left, I sat on the edge of my bed and allowed myself to feel the full weight of my situation. At 74, I had been discarded by my own family, warehoused in a place that felt more like a prison than a home. The walls of my room were bare. The window looked out onto a parking lot, and the only sounds were the shuffle of nurses' feet in the hallway and the distant murmur of confused elderly voices. That's when I heard a familiar voice from the doorway. Thomas Miller." I looked up to see a tall, thin man with gray hair and a surprised expression. It took me a moment to recognize Walter Hoffman, my old colleague from the Postal Service. We'd worked together for 15 years before he transferred to the Delaware office, and I hadn't seen him in over a decade. "Walter, what on earth are you doing here?" "I've been here 8 months, he replied, stepping into my room. "After my stroke last year, my daughter decided she couldn't handle my care anymore. Too much responsibility, she said." His voice carried the same bitter edge I was feeling. We talked through lunch and well into the afternoon. Walter told me about losing his independence, watching his daughter sell his house and dispose of his belongings, and gradually accepting his fate in this place. But as we spoke, I noticed something different about Walter compared to the other residents I'd observed. His mind was sharp, his conversation engaging, and despite his physical limitations from the stroke, he seemed far from ready to give up on life. "But you," he said, studying me carefully, "you don't belong here. You're walking fine, your mind is clear. You don't need assistance with daily activities. What's your story?" I told him everything. The sudden arrival of Stephen's family, the gradual takeover of my home, Patricia's systematic erasure of my life, and finally the ultimatum about Sunset Manor, or legal guardianship. Walter listened without interruption, his expression growing more incredulous with each detail. "And the house is still in your name?" he asked when I finished. "Yes. Stephen was supposed to have it transferred to him 2 years ago, but he kept postponing it. Something about tax implications and waiting until after I couldn't finish the sentence. "Until after you died," Walter completed bluntly. He had always been direct about uncomfortable truths. "So legally, you still own the property they're living in?" "Technically, yes. But what good does that do me now?" Walter leaned back in his chair, with a calculating expression I remembered from our postal service days when he was working out a particularly complex routing problem. "Thomas, my friend, you might have more power in this situation than you realize." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you own that house outright, you can do whatever you want with it, including selling it." The idea hit me like lightning. Sell the house, but it's been my home for 40 years. It's where Martha and I built our life together. And now your son and his wife have taken it from you anyway. They're living there using your belongings, sleeping in your bedroom, and you're stuck in this place. Walter's eyes gleamed with the spark of an idea forming. What if you could get your house back and teach them a lesson at the same time? For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something that might have been hope stirring in my chest. Walter's nephew Marcus turned out to be exactly what I needed: a sharp real estate agent with a reputation for handling delicate situations. He visited Sunset Manor the next day, ostensibly to see his uncle, but actually to meet with me in the small garden behind the building where residents rarely ventured. "Uncle Walter explained your situation," Marcus said, settling onto the weathered bench beside me. "And I think I can help you. Property values in Rehoboth Beach have skyrocketed in the past 2 years. A waterfront house like yours, even with the complications, will attract serious buyers." "What complications?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Well, your son and his family are currently living there. Most buyers wouldn't want to deal with evicting tenants, even family members. But I have a client who might be perfect for your situation." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me photos of an impressive waterfront property. "Jonathan Baker. He's 55, recently sold his chain of restaurants in Virginia, and he's looking for a retirement home on the Delaware coast. More importantly, he's specifically interested in properties where he can build a guest house or in-law suite." My heart jumped. "A guest house?" "Exactly. Your lot is large enough to accommodate a separate structure. If we can find a buyer willing to let you live in a guest house on the property, you'd have your independence back while still being near the water you love." The idea was almost too good to believe. "But how would we manage the showings? I can't exactly waltz up to my former front door with potential buyers while Stephen and Patricia are living there." Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he'd handled trickier situations. "Leave that to me. Sunset Manor has a program of day trips for residents. Museums, shopping centers, gardens. Very common for family members or friends to take residents on these outings. You'll be officially visiting the botanical gardens while actually touring your property with Mr. Baker." Over the next week, Marcus worked his magic behind the scenes. He prepared all the paperwork, researched comparable sales in the area, and most importantly, arranged for me to meet Jonathan Baker. When the day came, I joined a group of residents boarding a van for what the staff believed was a trip to see the spring flowers at the Rehoboth Beach Botanical Gardens. Instead, Marcus picked me up around the corner in his black sedan, and we drove to a coffee shop where Jonathan Baker was waiting. Jonathan wasn't what I'd expected from a successful restaurant owner. Instead of a flashy businessman in an expensive suit, I met a calm, thoughtful man in khakis and a button-down shirt with graying temples and laugh lines that suggested he smiled often. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Miller, and I've heard about your situation, and I want you to know I respect what you're doing. It takes courage to take control of your life at any age, but especially when family members are trying to make decisions for you." We spent an hour talking before even discussing the house. Jonathan told me about building his restaurant business from a single diner he'd inherited from his father, about losing his wife to cancer 3 years earlier, and about his dream of retiring somewhere he could watch the sunrise over water every morning. "I've been looking at properties for 8 months," he said. "But every house I've seen feels empty, like it's waiting for life to happen. Your house, from what Marcus has told me, has a history. It has meaning. That's what I'm looking for." When we finally drove to the house, Marcus had already confirmed that Stephen was at work and Patricia had taken her parents shopping in Dover. The coast was clear for our tour. Walking through my front door felt surreal. The house looked familiar yet foreign, like visiting a place from a distant dream. Patricia had made more changes since I'd left. New curtains in the living room, different artwork on the walls, and my favorite reading chair had been replaced with a modern sectional sofa that looked uncomfortable and impersonal. Jonathan walked through each room, slowly asking questions about the history of the house, the neighborhood, the view from different windows. But he wasn't evaluating the property like the typical buyer focused on profit potential. He was imagining a life there. "This kitchen has good light," he observed, looking out the window toward the bay. "I can picture making coffee here in the morning and watching the water wake up." In the backyard, he stood on the deck, where Martha and I had spent countless evenings studying the layout of the property, with the eye of someone who understood space and possibility. "The guest house could go there," he said, pointing to a level area near the back corner of the lot. "Close enough to the main house for convenience, but far enough for privacy. We could design it with its own entrance, maybe even a small porch facing the water." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt genuinely hopeful. "You'd really be comfortable with me living on the property?" Jonathan turned to look at me directly. "Mr. Miller, when I was young, my grandfather lived in a small apartment above my family's restaurant. He taught me everything I knew about cooking, about business, about treating people with respect. When he died, I missed not just him, but the wisdom that comes from having someone around who's lived through more seasons than you have." He gestured toward the water. "This house has good bones and a beautiful setting, but what makes it special is the 4 decades of life you and your wife built here. I'd be honored to be the next caretaker of that legacy, and I'd be even more honored to have you stay and share some of that history." By the time Marcus dropped me back at Sunset Manor that afternoon, Jonathan had made an offer that exceeded the market value of the house by 20%. More importantly, he'd agreed to include in the purchase contract a clause requiring him to build a guest house to my specifications and guaranteeing me the right to live there for as long as I wished. "The paperwork will take about 10 days to finalize," Marcus explained as we parted ways. "The deed transfer will be recorded automatically once all the conditions are met. Your son and his family won't know about the sale until it's legally complete and irreversible." "What happens then?" "Then Mr. Baker, as the new legal owner, will inform them that they have 30 days to vacate the premises. Much more time than they gave you to pack up your life." That night, lying in my narrow bed at Sunset Manor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about the future. In less than 2 weeks, I would not only regain my independence, but also teach Stephen and Patricia a lesson about treating family members with respect. I thought about the expression on Patricia's face when she learned that the house she'd been redecorating would soon belong to someone else. I imagined Stephen's shock when he realized that his plans to inherit my property had crumbled because of his own greed and impatience. But most of all, I looked forward to sitting on the porch of my new guest house, watching the sunset over Rehoboth Bay, and knowing that I'd proven something important to myself. It's never too late to stand up for your dignity, no matter who tries to take it away from you. 10 days later, Marcus called with the news I'd been waiting for. "It's official, Thomas. The deed has been recorded. Jonathan Baker is now the legal owner of your former house. Are you ready for the big reveal?" My heart was pounding as I hung up the phone. After weeks of careful planning, the moment of truth had arrived. Stephen had called me the day before to mention, almost as an afterthought, that they were having a celebration that Saturday for Richard's 75th birthday. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. "We're having the party at the house," Stephen had said, his casual tone suggesting he saw nothing wrong with hosting celebrations in property that legally belonged to me. "Patricia's been planning it for weeks. Richard's really excited." I hadn't mentioned that I wouldn't be spending that Saturday staring at the institutional walls of Sunset Manor. Instead, I would be making a surprise appearance at the party as the former owner introducing the new owner to his tenants. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Delaware weather that somehow seemed appropriate for what was about to unfold. Jonathan picked me up at Sunset Manor at noon, dressed in a navy blazer and khakis, looking every inch the successful businessman he was. "Nervous?" he asked as we drove toward Rehoboth Beach. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also more excited than I've been in years." Marcus met us at the end of my former street, where we could see cars already filling the driveway and lining the curb. Catering trucks were parked near the kitchen entrance, and I could see people moving around inside the house preparing for what looked like a substantial celebration. "Looks like quite a party," Jonathan observed. "I feel almost guilty about crashing it." "Don't," I replied firmly. "They're celebrating in a house they stole from me. A little disruption is the least they deserve." We pulled into the driveway behind a BMW I didn't recognize, probably belonging to one of Patricia's relatives. Through the kitchen window, I could see Patricia directing caterers while wearing an elegant black dress, her hair perfectly styled for the occasion. She looked like a woman who had everything under control, completely unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. Stephen answered the door wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, clearly in the middle of party preparations. His face went through a series of expressions when he saw me standing on the porch: surprise, confusion, and finally something that looked like panic. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Stephen," I said, keeping my voice calm and pleasant. "I've come to visit my house, or rather my former house." Before Stephen could respond, Jonathan stepped forward with his hand extended. "Stephen Miller, I'm Jonathan Baker, the new owner of this property. Thank you for taking such good care of it." The color drained from Stephen's face as he automatically shook Jonathan's hand. "New owner? What are you talking about?" "May we come in?" Jonathan asked politely. "I think we should discuss this inside, especially since you have guests arriving." Stephen stepped back wordlessly, his mouth opening and closing, like a fish out of water. We walked into the living room, which was decorated with balloons and streamers for Richard's birthday party. The furniture had been rearranged to accommodate more seating, and I could see that Patricia had gone all out with flowers, professional catering, and even hired musicians setting up in the corner. "Stephen, who's at the door?" Patricia appeared from the kitchen, stopping dead when she saw me. "Thomas? What on earth are you doing here?" "Patricia, I'd like you to meet Jonathan Baker," I said, gesturing to my companion. "The man who bought this house from me last week." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the caterers clinking dishes in the kitchen and the musicians tuning their instruments on the deck. Patricia's face went through the same color changes as Stephen's, from confused to pale to flushed with anger. "Bought the house?" she repeated, her voice rising to a pitch that made several guests in the next room turn to look. "What do you mean, bought the house?" "I mean exactly what I said," I replied calmly. "I sold the house to Mr. Baker. The deed was transferred and recorded on Tuesday. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." At that moment, Richard and Linda Foster entered the living room dressed in their party best and clearly expecting to enjoy their celebration. Richard was a tall, distinguished man who carried himself with military bearing, while Linda was perfectly groomed and obviously accustomed to being the center of attention at social gatherings. "What's going on here?" Richard demanded, taking in the tense scene before him. "Patricia, who are these people?" "This is Thomas," Patricia said through gritted teeth, "and apparently he's sold the house out from under us." Linda's hand flew to her chest in theatrical shock. "Sold the house? How could he sell the house when you live here?" Because it was legally his house to sell, Jonathan answered before I could respond. And I'm the buyer. I'll be taking possession in 30 days as outlined in the purchase agreement. This is impossible, Stephen said, finally finding his voice. Dad, you're living in a care facility. You can't make major decisions like selling property without family consultation. I'm living in Sunset Manor because you forced me there, I replied. And I was declared fully competent by an independent physician before signing any papers. The sale is completely legal. More guests had wandered into the living room, drawn by the raised voices and obvious tension. I recognized some of Patricia's relatives and a few neighbors, all dressed for a celebration, and now witnessing what was turning into a family disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia announced with forced cheerfulness, why don't you go out to the deck? The musicians are ready, and the caterers will be serving appetizers shortly. But nobody moved. The drama unfolding in the living room was far more interesting than any party entertainment. You can't just throw us out, Linda protested, her voice taking on a shrill quality. We sold our house to move here. We have nowhere else to go. You have 30 days to find alternative accommodations, Jonathan said matter-of-factly. That's more notice than most landlords provide, and certainly more time than Thomas was given when you decided to ship him off to a nursing home. We didn't ship him anywhere, Stephen objected. Dad needed professional care. He couldn't manage this big house on his own anymore. Really? I looked around the room at all the guests watching our confrontation. Then why did you move your entire family in here instead of hiring the professional help you claimed I needed? Patricia stepped closer to me, her eyes blazing with anger. Thomas, you don't understand what you've done. This isn't just about us. Stephen has a job here, the children have school, we have commitments, responsibilities. And I had a life, I replied quietly. A life you dismantled piece by piece until I felt like a stranger in my own home. You threw away my belongings, you took over my bedroom, you treated me like an inconvenience to be managed rather than the man who raised your husband and owned the house you were living in. The room had gone completely silent, except for the sound of the musicians on the deck, who were apparently unaware of the drama happening inside. Even the caterers had stopped moving around, listening from the kitchen doorway. The sale cannot be legal, Richard declared with the authority of someone accustomed to having his pronouncements accepted without question. Stephen, call our lawyer immediately. This man took advantage of an elderly person in a vulnerable state. I'm standing right here, I said firmly. And I'm neither vulnerable nor incompetent. I'm a 74-year-old man who got tired of being treated like a burden by people who were supposed to love and respect me. Jonathan cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss the practical details. You have until October 15th to relocate. I'll be hiring contractors to build a guest house on the property where Thomas will be living, so construction will begin shortly after you vacate. The implications hit Patricia like a physical blow. You're building him a house here on this property? A guest house, yes. Thomas will have his independence while remaining near the water he loves. It seemed like the perfect solution for everyone. Except for us, Stephen said bitterly. What are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to go? I looked at my son, seeing not the grateful child I'd raised, but the entitled man he'd become. You're supposed to do what millions of adults do every day, Stephen. Find housing you can afford with your own resources. Rent an apartment, buy a smaller house, figure it out, like everyone else has to. This is insane. Patricia turned to the guests, who were still standing in uncomfortable silence. I'm sorry, everyone. We're having a family crisis. Perhaps we should postpone the celebration. Oh no, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. Don't cancel the party on my account. Mr. Baker and I just wanted to deliver the news personally and answer any questions about the transition. We'll leave you to enjoy Richard's birthday. As we walked toward the door, I heard Patricia hissing at Stephen about lawyers and legal challenges and how this couldn't be happening. But Jonathan had been thorough in his preparation, and Marcus had assured me the sale was ironclad. Standing on the porch where this whole ordeal had begun weeks earlier, I took one last look at the house where Martha and I had been so happy, where I'd raised my children, where I'd expected to spend my final years in peace. "Any regrets?" Jonathan asked quietly. I thought about that question as we walked to his car, listening to the stunned voices from inside the house trying to process what had just happened. Did I regret disrupting their party? Did I regret shocking them in front of their guests? Did I regret taking back control of my life in such a dramatic fashion? None whatsoever, I replied. For the first time in months, I feel like myself again. The phone calls started within hours of our departure from the party. The staff at Sunset Manor informed me that Stephen had called 3 times before dinner, demanding to speak with me about reversing this insanity and threatening legal action if I didn't come to my senses immediately. When I finally returned his call that evening, his voice was a mixture of anger and desperation that I'd never heard before. "Dad, you've made a terrible mistake. We've consulted with an attorney and there are grounds to challenge this sale. You were living in a care facility when you signed those papers. Any judge would question your mental capacity." "Stephen," I replied calmly, "I was evaluated by an independent physician before signing anything. Dr. Harrison confirmed that I'm mentally competent and fully capable of making my own decisions. Your lawyer will find that the sale is completely legal and binding." "But where are we supposed to go?" The desperation in his voice was becoming more pronounced. "Patricia's parents sold their house. The kids have school. I have my job at the accounting firm. Our whole life is built around being here." "Then you should have thought of that before you decided to throw me away like garbage." I surprised myself with the firmness in my voice. "You made your choice when you prioritized your convenience over my dignity. Now you get to live with the consequences." Over the next week, they tried every strategy they could think of. Patricia called pretending to be concerned about my welfare, suggesting that I was being manipulated by strangers who wanted to take advantage of me. "Thomas, you don't really know this Jonathan Baker person. How can you trust him with your future?" "I trust him more than I trust you," I answered honestly. "He's treating me with respect and offering me independence. You treated me like a problem to be solved." Stephen attempted to guilt me by having Ashley call, though I could tell she was being coached in the background. "Grandpa, Mom, and Dad are really stressed about having to move. Isn't there some way you could work this out with them?" "Ashley, sweetheart, I'm sorry your parents are stressed, but they created this situation when they decided I was too much trouble to have around. Sometimes adults have to face the results of their choices." The most pathetic attempt came from Richard, who called to offer me money to reverse the sale. "Thomas, I'll write you a check for $50,000 if you can find a way to cancel this transaction. We're too old to start over somewhere else." "Richard," I replied, "I'm 4 years older than you, and I'm starting over just fine. The difference is that I'm doing it by choice, not because someone decided I was inconvenient." Meanwhile, Jonathan kept me updated on the progress of our plans. He'd hired architects to design the guest house and contractors to begin construction as soon as Stephen's family vacated the property. "It's going to be beautiful, Thomas. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, living room with a fireplace and a screened porch facing the water. You'll have all the independence you want with the security of knowing someone's nearby if you need help." "What about you?" I asked. "Won't having me on the property cramp your style?" Jonathan laughed. "Thomas, I'm 55, widowed and retired. My style these days involves reading books, cooking elaborate meals for one person, and talking to my cat. I think I can handle having a neighbor who might actually hold up his end of a conversation." 3 weeks after the confrontation at the party, Stephen made one final attempt to change my mind. He arrived at Sunset Manor with Ashley in tow, both of them looking defeated and exhausted. We met in the small visiting room, and for the first time since this began, Stephen's arrogance was completely gone. "Dad, I want to apologize. he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We handled everything wrong. We should have talked to you about Patricia's parents, should have asked what you wanted, instead of just deciding what was best for you. Yes, you should have, I agreed. Is there any way we can fix this? Any way we can make it right? I looked at my son, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes for the first time in years. Stephen, you can't unring a bell. You showed me exactly how you and Patricia view me as a burden to be managed, not as a person to be respected. That knowledge doesn't just disappear because you're facing consequences. Ashley reached over and took my hand. Grandpa, I know Mom and Dad made mistakes, but they do love you. They're just scared and don't know how to admit they were wrong. Ashley, I love your parents too. But love without respect is just sentiment. Your parents love the idea of me as the grandfather who spoils you and leaves them an inheritance. They don't love the reality of me as a person with opinions and needs and the right to make my own choices. Stephen was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Do we just never see each other again? That's up to you, I replied. I'll be living in my guest house by Christmas. You're welcome to visit if you can treat me as an equal instead of a problem to be managed. But I won't tolerate being patronized or manipulated ever again. When they left, Ashley hugged me tightly and whispered, I'm proud of you, Grandpa. You stood up for yourself when nobody else would. That night, lying in my narrow bed at Sunset Manor, for what I knew would be one of the last times I thought about the price of dignity. It had cost me my relationship with my son, at least temporarily. It had disrupted the lives of people I'd once cared about. It had forced me to become harder and more calculating than I'd ever been before. But it had also given me back something invaluable, my self-respect. For the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring today. In 6 weeks, I would be living in my own space again, making my own decisions, accountable to no one but myself. The old Thomas might have felt guilty about the chaos I'd caused. The new Thomas understood that sometimes creating chaos is the only way to restore order to your life. Moving day arrived on a crisp November morning that reminded me of the day Martha and I had first walked through this house 40 years earlier. Jonathan picked me up at Sunset Manor in his pickup truck, and we drove to what was about to become my new home. The guest house exceeded every expectation I'd dared to have. Situated in the back corner of the lot, with a perfect view of Rehoboth Bay, it looked like a small cottage from a fairy tale. Cedar shingles weathered to a soft gray-white trim around multi-paned windows and a wraparound porch with rocking chairs facing the water. The contractors finished ahead of schedule, Jonathan explained as we pulled into the driveway. I've been staying here for the past week, making sure everything works perfectly. Inside the house was everything he'd promised and more. Hardwood floors gleamed in the morning sunlight, streaming through oversized windows. The kitchen was compact but fully equipped with granite countertops and modern appliances sized for 1 or 2 people. The living room featured a stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves that Jonathan had already partially filled with volumes he thought I might enjoy. The master bedroom has its own bathroom with a walk-in shower, he said, leading me down a short hallway. No bathtub to climb into grab bars where you need them, but nothing that screams old person's house. The bedroom was perfect. Large enough for a comfortable bed and reading chair with French doors opening onto the porch, and a view of the water that took my breath away. I could picture myself having morning coffee out there, watching the sunrise paint the bay in shades of gold and pink. Jonathan, this is incredible. How can I ever thank you? By living here and enjoying it, he replied simply. By being the neighbor I hoped you'd be, and by helping me understand what 40 years of loving this place looks like. Over the next few weeks, we developed an easy routine. I would wake early and make coffee on my porch, often finding Jonathan already up and working in the garden Martha had planted decades earlier. We'd wave to each other across the yard, 2 men comfortable with morning silence and the peaceful rhythm of retirement. Some evenings we'd share dinner, taking turns cooking, and discovering that we both enjoyed trying new recipes and discussing books. Other nights we'd sit on our respective porches, him with his cat and me, with my memories content to exist in the same space without feeling obligated to entertain each other. Ashley visited every other weekend, driving down from the University of Delaware, where she was studying finance. She'd bring her laundry and her homework, spreading textbooks across my kitchen table, while I cooked elaborate Sunday breakfasts that reminded me of the family meals Martha used to prepare. "I love it here, Grandpa," she said one Sunday afternoon, as we walked along the water's edge. "It feels like you again. Not the sad, angry person you became when Mom and Dad were controlling everything, but the grandfather I remember from when I was little." "I love it too, sweetheart. For the first time in years, I feel like I have a future worth looking forward to." Stephen and Patricia had found a rental house in Lewis, about 20 minutes away. The children had transferred schools, Stephen was commuting to his job, and Patricia's parents had moved into a senior community near Bethany Beach. I heard updates through Ashley, but we hadn't spoken directly since that final conversation at Sunset Manor. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to pretend that nothing had happened either. Trust once broken so completely doesn't repair itself just because circumstances change. What mattered was that I was home again, not in the house where Martha and I had built our life, but in a new space that honored those memories while allowing me to create fresh ones. I was 74 years old, living independently, making my own choices, and proving every day that dignity and respect aren't luxuries for the elderly, but necessities for anyone who wants to call their existence living rather than just surviving. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it the kind of renewal I hadn't felt in decades. I was sitting on my porch one evening in March watching the sun set over Rehoboth Bay when I heard a car pull into the main driveway. Through the garden I could see Stephen getting out of his sedan, standing for a moment, as if gathering courage. He walked slowly across the yard toward my guest house, and I noticed he looked older, more weathered than I remembered. When he reached the porch steps, he stopped and looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child, who'd broken something valuable and needed to confess. "Dad, could we talk?" I gestured to the empty rocking chair beside me. "Of course." He sat down carefully, staring out at the water for a long time before speaking. "I've been thinking about what you said, about respect, about treating you like a person instead of a problem." His voice was quiet, uncertain. "You were right. We were wrong. I don't know if you can forgive us, but I needed you to know that I understand now what we took from you." We sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky. Some wounds heal with time. Others require acknowledgement before they can begin to mend. "I've missed you, Dad. I've missed you too, son." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. And at 74, I'd learned that sometimes a beginning is enough. Never let others define your worth or control your destiny regardless of age. Family bonds built on manipulation crumble, but dignity and self-respect once reclaimed create the foundation for genuine happiness. It's never too late to stand up for yourself and start fresh.